histamine is made in and stored in granules in the mast cells, and it causes permeability of blood vessels. So when it's released, it will cause vasodilatation with increased blood flow to an area. So if you think about what happens when you're bitten by a mosquito, it usually swells, it goes red, and it gets itchy. And that's all caused by histamine. So it swells because it causes permeability of the vessels, the little capillaries. So fluid passes out into the tissues to create the swelling. It causes redness, and it does that by the vasodilatation, and it causes itchiness because that's what the histamine also does to the cells. So that's sort of an easy way of remembering it, really. You don't need very much histamine to be released to cause those symptoms. It also does some other things in the body. It's responsible for your circadian rhythm. It contributes to that. So that's why if somebody has high histamine, they can have insomnia and real difficulty sleeping. And if they've had a lot of histamine to eat that day, high histamine foods, Coca-Cola, coffee, chocolate, then they might find it really difficult to fall asleep. And it's not just the caffeine, it's because their histamine is high. Also, we have an increase in histamine as a natural sort of part of our rhythm at about 3 a.m. So sometimes people wake at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning because their histamine is high. It can also cause panic attacks because when your histamine is high, your body tries to reduce it by releasing adrenaline, and that can cause panic attack. So some of these patients, some people who are really confident, calm people who've never have taken everything in their stride, suddenly start experiencing anxiety and panic attacks, which seem to come from nowhere. And it's when the histamine is high, it's an indication that that's happening. And I think it's quite reassuring for them to hear that it's caused by something physical. That it's a chemical that we will be able to get under control. What else does it do? And it releases acid in the stomach, which is helpful for protein digestion. So those, and it's a neurotransmitter. It's a neurotransmitter. So sometimes when it's very high, people describe this vibrational sensation in their body, and I'm pretty sure that's to do with the histamine causing nerves to tingle, and fire.
So with MCAS, that creates excessive histamine, is that right?
And quite commonly, most of my patients who have had their genetics tested, because that can be very, very helpful to do that. And I use a company called LifeCode GX, and we do their methylation cycle, their histamine metabolism. Yeah, they're very good, aren't they? Their reports are lovely, very easy to follow and helpful. And when we look at those, we often see that they've got histamine intolerance too. Now, histamine intolerance is when you don't produce enough histamine metabolic enzymes. So the enzymes that metabolize histamine away are diamine oxidase and one called HNMT. And if you don't make enough of those, then you've got a perfect storm, haven't you? You've got your mast cells making too much histamine and your poor enzymes not being able to cope with the demand. You can have the symptoms even if you have normal DAO levels. If your histamine is so high, it just uses up all your DAO too quickly. But generally, these poor patients don't make enough anyway, so they're poor producers. So when we checked Jessie's diamine oxidase level when she was super ill, it came back as less than 2, and that meant it was actually undetectable. So as soon as she was making any, it was gone. Her histamine was so high. And when 6 months later, when we had managed to get everything much more under control, it was 23.5. And the labs report that as normal, but it's not normal. Normal is 30 to 200. So I would just put that out there for people to know that if their diamine oxidase level comes back less than 30, it's not normal. It's going to vary depending on your histamine load. And some of the symptoms she had were totally histamine driven. So she was bloated like a balloon, and that was from all the fluid passing through her tissues and causing hyperinflammation. She was red because of the vasodilatation. She had low blood pressure because of that, so she had terrible POTS. She felt really dizzy most of the time. She couldn't, especially if she stood up or sat up, or stood for any length of time. Even just 5 minutes standing was too much. She had nausea, and that's sometimes patients will wake up in the middle of the night, which was Jessie was doing this. She was waking up with sudden nausea and having to rush to the bathroom, but feeling really dizzy because her blood pressure was low. And then, being sick in the middle of the night just because of histamine, not because of, food poisoning or, a virus or anything, just because her histamine was high. And it would literally wake her up in the middle of the night. Her eczema was so bad that she couldn't turn her head. If she moved her head, her skin split. And she had terrible eczema in her antecubital fossa, and it was just awful. The photos are terrible. She had dermatographism, so her face was red from the vasodilatation. You could write your name on her forehead and it would stay there for 20 minutes. She had a migraine headache for 4 weeks, day and night. She couldn't sleep for a second for 7 days and 7 nights. Her insomnia was so bad from the high histamine, it was so high. And this, her IBS was terrible, complete constipation, total blockage, nothing worked. She had pains and aches in all her joints, her knees, especially going up the stairs. Her muscles were aching, so she had fibromyalgia. It was just horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And and she had anxiety and panic attacks. So she had a full house, bless her. And that was all from drinking smoothies of superfoods. Now you see them being sold in Victoria Station, and people are, I think it's become more obvious now because people are saturated in high histamine foods and drinks. How often do we go to catch the train to go into London and people are standing on the platform with a Costa coffee or Starbucks or whatever it is, and they've got this, and they've also got in their homes these Nespresso machines, and they're having really strong coffee before they even leave the house, so they're topping up their histamine all the time. And then we're having more processed foods which are high in histamine, and it's everywhere, isn't it? You can have processed food outlets everywhere. And not only is that creating this obesity pandemic that we've got, epidemic of obesity, but it's also causing, mast cell activation in so many people.